Which podcaster, other than Ruth Marcus, would you most like to see put in a government position, and what would it be?
Okay, my podcaster is Ina Garten, and it would be in the newly created Department of Comfort Food, not Doge, but DOCF. And she would help instruct us all how to cook comfort food to get us through the rest of this mess. And Philip Bump, I dare you to top that.
On long road trips, there's a podcaster who just does the history of philosophy, which is horribly boring unless you're like a philosophy nerd. But it just seems as though if you're going to put someone in government, it might be someone who like comes at it from an approach of rationality and having an extensive background in world history, which, probably isn't Dan Bongino.
I'm going to install the two Brits from The Rest is History. We're going to pack the Supreme Court with them so that at the very least they will be able to contextualize this civilization-ending disaster we are going through. So how's that for cheery, Ruth?
That cheery enough.
All right.
But I guess your 2-week vacation didn't actually work.
Nope. I was not granted asylum in Argentina, although arguably it's not a whole lot better there than it is here. So I am reluctantly back at my desk. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, no matter how hard we try. I'm Dana Milbank.
And I'm Ruth Marcus. This week, there's once again a dizzying amount of news from the Trump administration, between purging top leaders at the Pentagon, laying off thousands of federal employees, and elevating a bombastic podcaster to a top position at the FBI. The message is clear. Expertise out. Loyalty to Trump in.
So today, we're going to talk about the threads that connect all of these actions and what happens when our government loses such a vast amount of competence.
And we're joined by our colleague, Philip Bump, to talk more. Hi, Philip. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, the march of Elon Musk has continued. Thousands of federal workers terminated, and even more subjected to his confusing antics or orders. The take-it-or-leave-it buyout deals, the demand that people bullet point their accomplishments of the last week, or maybe it's not a demand, maybe it's just a request. What do you guys think is really happening here? Is confusion the point? Or is Musk himself just confused or ignorant about how government works?
Yeah, I think that Musk is deeply ignorant about how government works. I think that we've never seen a sharper example of the Dunning-Kruger effect in my lifetime than Elon Musk's approach to government, and that he thinks he knows a lot about it and actually knows very little. I think, too, and I wrote about this yesterday, I think, too, that we're seeing the way in which the right-wing media bubble has absorbed Washington, in that there is a way to do this. And, there have been a lot of comparisons to what Clinton and Gore did to try and reduce the size of government. But, of course, the way they did that was meticulous and careful, and they worked with government bureaus and agencies. But if you take that approach, you don't get a lot of traffic on your social media site if you happen to own one, which Elon Musk does. And so we see this approach that is very much about creating fires because fires are interesting and fires go viral and fires get Fox News clips. And so this is how it's being done. It's being done through the lens of what is the most exciting for the people that are following along on Twitter as opposed to what's actually useful.
Wait, so are you saying this is bread and circuses, or is it bread and circuses with a malign intent?
Yeah, no, I no, it's more like a gladiator combat where he's happy to see people get axe murdered, but he's ensuring that the crowd is clapping along.
Yeah, it's this sort of thing has actually worked for Elon Musk, right? And maybe it works if you're building cars or you're making spaceships or you're making, I don't know what he's turned Twitter into. But the whole idea of burning things down and regenerating and creating energy here. But we're not talking about making cars or a social media company. This is the government of the United States. And we're talking about actual human beings involved here. I mean, yes, the millions of federal workers who are involved, but the tens and hundreds of millions of people who rely on their government. And you're even starting to see now some Republicans, my new favorite senator, John Curtis, talking about how cold and hard Musk has been. It wants to put some compassion and dignity in. Rich McCormick, who was brutalized at his town hall meeting, also saying we need to show more compassion. So I know I always do the Pollyanna thing, Ruth, but it seems to me that the burn it all down and recreate thing, I feel that the backlash has really begun here. I think we've reached the turning point. I think we're looking at a 2010 style backlash. That's the effect, and I can see. Our listeners can't see this, but I do see you rolling your eyes.
I insert eye roll here. We're gonna maybe I'll just start to cough quietly, and then people will know then that I'm disagreeing with you. Look, I think that we should seize the little glimmers of hope, whether it's one senator or one member of Congress. That's not exactly an insurrection, to use probably the wrong word, because we had one of those. I do think that the interesting event was the government response to the latest and government. Who knows what we're talking about when we talk about government, because there was a distinction between Trump and his cabinet secretaries in terms of their response to the "send me your email or else we will have deemed you to have resigned" thing. I thought that was actually, if I was going to be a hopeful person, which I generally am, but not right now, that's something that I would seize on, is evidence of the deep state cabinet, at least some of it, rebelling against Musk. But then Trump seemed to have declared himself on Team Musk. So I think we need to watch that space. It's definitely not a stable space. But even if Elon Musk shuffled away and were replaced by Ina Garten stirring her stew pot for all of us, I think we'd still be in a heap of trouble.
And punctuating this grim prognosis, our listeners also cannot see the 4 bottles of wine on the shelf over Ruth's shoulder that look to be mostly empty. All right, so Elon Musk isn't the only person doing the firing. On Friday, Trump got rid of 6 top generals, including the nation's most senior military official, Joint Chiefs Chairman C.Q. Brown Jr. Pete Hegseth, among others, has said this is business as usual. Presidents can pick their military leaders. What do you guys think this is really about, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the point that Ruth made earlier, this is about loyalty, right? That Donald Trump feels very aggrieved, and he's long felt aggrieved, but he feels particularly aggrieved since 2021, since the indictments came down against him, since obviously going all the way back to the Russia investigation. He feels as though everyone's out to get him. He has long complained about his generals, but then that overlaps with his sense that the people who work for the government work for him, and that they should be attentive to what it is that he wants. And so he is very open to getting rid of all these people and putting in people who are just going to do what he wants, although it is antithetical to the way that the United States was constructed at the outset. It is, however, very much in keeping with him in the way he's long approached this. And, there's no mystery here. He wants generals and he wants loyalists who are going to do whatever he wants them to do, up to and including what Mark Esper wouldn't, which is endorse his use of the Insurrection Act against protesters, right? Like,
shoot him in the leg.
Yeah. We know what the lines are that the last people wouldn't cross, and now he's going to put in people who are happy to cross those lines. So, starting with Hegseth, for God's sake. Like, we shouldn't talk about Pete Hegseth as though this is a normal Secretary of Defense. He's a Fox News anchor, for God's sake. It's important to keep all that in context.
You guys can't see it, but Philip is grinning here, and it's funny but not funny. My word of this week's podcast is dangerous. And what's dangerous here isn't just replacing generals like General C.Q. Brown with kind of second or third tier, literally technically unqualified, because you're not supposed to pick from these ranks. But something that people have not focused on enough from my point of view, it will not surprise you to know that this is getting rid of the lawyers. This is getting rid of the JAGs, the top lawyers, and I think it's 3 different of the military services. He wants this because, and Hegseth really said the quiet part out loud the other day, he does not want lawyers giving inconvenient, uncomfortable advice about what does or does not violate the law. And so whether it's what Trump is allowed to use the military for in domestic areas, or whether it's what Trump is able to use the military for at Guantanamo, or whether it's what how the military can behave unlawfully in violation of the laws of war. Lawyers are inconvenient, and we are getting rid of the inconvenient lawyers, and we are putting God knows who in their place.
Can I just say, too, you're absolutely right about the danger, but I also think that one of the things the administration, Trump in particular, wants to do is he wants people to be afraid, and he wants people to feel like, he is this ominous threat to them, which, of course, this threat exists and the danger exists. But I feel as though it's also important to recognize that it's ludicrous, right? That there is this ludicrousness that is worth laughing at to all of this. The way in which this is being conducted and the outcome of it is just absolutely ridiculous by the existing standard up until January 19th of this year.
Yeah. And there's another insidious layer here on top of this. And of course, who's been eliminated here? The black man, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the woman, who's the chief of staff of the Navy. I don't think that's just an accident. Hegseth had said that the Navy chief was a DEI hire because she's a woman. So, all of this purging of DEI is really, just another word for restoring white men to run the military.
Well, can I say one quick thing about that? Because one of the things that's striking for all of the chest thumping about the terrors of DEI and how it has caused planes to fall out of the sky and things like that is the absolute absence of meritocracy among the personnel choices of this administration. There has never been an administration that has been populated by less qualified, less meritorious, less experienced people than the Trump administration. And I know we're going to get to the new deputy director of the FBI after the break, but look at the new generals versus the old generals. Look at the cabinet secretaries. These are people who don't know what they're doing, and that's not an accident. And we kind of got to this, Philip and Dana, but I really want to keep going on it. Is the point here that we want to gut the federal government and privatize its services? Or is it a little more of the bread and circuses drive eyeballs to Twitter kind of thing that Philip was talking about? And Dana, I don't know that we heard from you on this, so I'm giving you the microphone now.
Every time the question is asked, what's the strategy here? What's this really about? I think you almost always come up empty because there probably isn't one. So I don't think Trump has a grand strategy. What he has is a lot of Stephen Millers and Russ Vought running around with their Project 2025 ideas of demonizing federal workers, of shrinking the federal government, essentially to sabotage the federal government, turn people against it so you can shrink it ever further. It's just generally a lot of chaos. It's not chaos theory, it's chaos.
I'm going to actually suggest it's more malign than that, Dana. And I don't know how we've kind of switched sides here in terms of who is more worried than the other. It's not just creating chaos. It is laying the groundwork for a new authoritarianism where the president is, the king that we were shown by the White House itself on the yet another faux Time magazine cover. He wants absolute power, as much power as he can grab, and he is doing a pretty scary and somewhat effective job of grabbing it.
He did say this week, we are the federal law.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that to go back to the original point, Trump hates government and loves attention. Elon Musk hates government for different reasons and loves attention. And the two of them are running roughshod over government in part just because they hate government and because they like the attention that comes from it. I think one of the things that we tend to lose sight of, although everyone is aware of it, is that Donald Trump spent decades as the autocratic leader of a private business. And no one could tell him no, and he could fire anyone he wanted to, and he liked it. And he liked the attention. He liked talking to Page Six, and he liked to be the star of that show. And that's what he wants the presidency to be. That's what he's always wanted the presidency to be. And we frame it in the context of backsliding democracy and a tendency toward authoritarianism because we understand how governments work. We understand that there is a seriousness to this. I don't think he fundamentally is sitting there thinking like, I want to be an autocrat like Putin. He's thinking, I want to be an autocrat like I have been used to being. And that the result for the United States is the decimation that we've been seeing over the past few weeks.
That sounds right to me. All right, we're going to talk about Trump picking a MAGA podcaster to help lead the FBI, Ruth's personal friend, Dan Bongino. But first, we have to take a quick break.
Welcome back. I'm Ruth Marcus, and I'm here with Dana Milbank and Philip Bump to talk about the gutting of the federal government as we know it and what is rising up in its place.
So Trump picking people without traditional experience to powerful positions isn't new. See Pete Hegseth and RFK Jr. But over the weekend, he gave MAGA podcaster Dan Bongino the number 2 job at the FBI. Ruth, it's time for you to tee off.
All right. Prepare yourselves. This actually makes me nervous on 2 separate and I think equally important fronts. First of all, it makes me nervous because Bongino is a nutcase. I mean, he has said so many crazy things about so many different alleged conspiracies, and specifically, he has said crazy and dismissive and hostile things about the very agency he has been brought in to be the day-to-day custodian of. The number 2 person at the FBI essentially runs the FBI and its 56 field offices on a day-to-day basis. And to bring in someone who has said that all the agents involved in the cases against Trump should be fired, that the whole place needs to be fumigated and cleared out. It's just crazy that he has been brought in there instead of somebody who, as has happened in the entire previous history of the FBI, is a former FBI agent. It's once again elevating the bombastic over the experienced. So it is scary that someone with this demeanor and attitude towards everything. He once said that his role in life now was just owning the libs. That was during one of my favorite episodes, the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. But this is not a serious government official. This is a provocateur who is bolstering the provocateur-in-chief, Kash Patel. But there's a more serious aspect to this, which is we are less safe now than we were 6 weeks ago. We had a whole commission after 9/11 to talk about how we missed the lead up to 9/11 and what needed to be done to bolster ourselves against further terrorist attacks or other problems. And we rejiggered the whole FBI to make it not just a law enforcement agency, but uncovering and deterring things before they occurred. The world is actually much more complicated now than it was after 9/11. We don't just face the threat of Islamic terrorism, but we faced a greater threat of domestic terrorism. We face a cyber threat that we hadn't had before. We face the threat from a rising China that we haven't had before. And Kash Patel and Dan Bongino don't understand this at all. They've wiped out this whole layer of expertise at the top of FBI headquarters, which they want to shutter and turn into a museum anyway. And they want the FBI to get back to playing cops and robbers like they're going after John Dillinger in the, good old J. Edgar Hoover days. And I hope it doesn't happen, but it is very possible that something very bad can happen, and we will come back and say, how did we let this happen? And we're going to learn it's because we put these 2 boobs in charge of the FBI.
What I'd say about Dan Bongino, all else aside, he has absolutely no experience running a large organization, and he has extremely crappy judgment, right? Like, I went back to see, after this announcement was made, to see the times in which he'd, attacked me on social media. And two of the several examples were when I was calling out Dinesh D'Souza's terrible film 2000 Mules, and he was just saying, well, what an idiot I was for not understanding that this showed fraud. And of course, that film was absolutely and utterly debunked, to the point that D'Souza himself actually had to step away from it. And then second was when I was like, hey, James Comer keeps saying that Biden took a bribe, but he's showing no evidence of it. Where's the bribe? And he was saying how my family might need counseling because I'm such an idiot. And of course, there was no bribe, and the whole thing was contrived. But this is the guy now who's in charge of federal law enforcement. His judgment is so poor that he follows his peers down these rabbit holes that are so obviously wrong from the outset. He just gets snookered by it because it comports with his worldview. And that is very much, even if he were the best manager of institutions in the universe, which he very much is not, that's not who you want managing this particular institute.
I think the Bongino thing is emblematic of what we've seen across the government. It's like they believe their own disinformation. So they're realigning the entire federal government to go after all these phantom enemies, the deep state, this invasion at the border and DEI. But what they've done is take away federal resources from the actual potential crises, whether this is influence from China or terrorism. And it's not just the FBI, it's across the government, whether it's, the FAA or food safety or health, and what we've just talked about, the military or, the financial regulators. I mean, we are setting ourselves up for any number of crises. We can't predict which one it will actually be. But instead of having people prepared to do this, they're off fighting the phantom deep state and DEI.
And not spending a lot of time worrying about inflation.
So, Dana, you actually led into the final question that we're going to talk about, which is, it's not just loyalists, it's people who are the kind of luminaries, such as it is, of the right-wing media information bubble. We have Musk, we have Hegseth, we have Bongino, we have others. Is Trump a captive of that infosphere, or is he the mastermind of it? And please discuss.
This is a chicken and egg problem, I believe we have here. So it's very hard to tell which one is influencing the other. I think there are, at last count, something like 20 Fox News personalities now running the government of the United States of America. And it's not clear whether Trump is a victim of this or the perpetrator of this. And in that sense, it doesn't really matter because, as I was saying a moment ago, the government is now being run based on a whole series of false premises.
I think that at this point in time, it's there very much is a feedback loop between Trump and the rest of the right-wing universe. But I think that it is underappreciated the extent to which that universe is what propelled Trump to his position in the first place. He was very much someone who consumed far-right content. He was a regular on Fox News before he ran for president in 2016. He had a gig there. He was reading Breitbart. And the way I'm convinced that the reason that Republicans in 2016 thought that he was this truth teller and he was the guy who was telling it like it was because all he was doing was regurgitating memes and themes that he heard from right-wing media back to them. And so they too were consuming all this nonsense that the Republican establishment at the time thought was verboten, thought you couldn't actually embrace or you'd lose voters. Trump was saying it and is repeating it back. And so they said, yeah, this guy's telling the truth because all he was doing was saying back to them same Breitbart themes. And I think that was a really crystallizing moment for Trump to be able to gain power on the right and then in concert with the right-wing media sphere ascend to dominate American politics.
With that, we've got to wrap this up because I've got a flight to Argentina. Thank you both for joining this episode of Impromptu.
Of course.
Thanks, Philip. Come back.
Will do.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Damir Marusic, Chris Sulentrop, and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know what you think about what's going on in the federal government. Send an email to impromptu@washpost.com. And PSA, Impromptu is now twice a week. Ruth and I will be here every Tuesday to unpack the biggest political news of the day, and you can tune in on Fridays to hear Drew Goins and Molly Roberts to talk about issues that are slightly less political. See you next week.